And welcome once again to EWTN's Bookmark. I'm Doug Keck, your host. Our guest is a good friend, Susan Tassone, author of St. Faustina Prayer Book for the Holy Souls in Purgatory, available from the EWTN Religious Catalog at EWTNRC.com. Great to see you again.
Nice to be back.
Yeah. You were on with Father Mitch a while back,
yes,
talking about the Holy Souls and St. Faustina. Here we are in this year, Jubilee year of mercy, of course, and so all of these Faustina mercy book kind of things are coming out, which is wonderful because St. Faustina is really the saint of this age,
yeah, right,
in many ways.
Apostle of mercy.
Exactly.
And Apostle of Purgatory.
And so let me ask you, because you've been the Apostle of Purgatory in some ways, certainly in these, on EWTN you have, and you've written so many books on it and given comfort to so many people, and the books are, we know it's giving comfort because the books are so popular. And especially
thanks to your network.
And writing about a topic that for a while there kind of got lost in the sauce after Vatican II. So how did you put together, a book about St. Faustina, a prayer book, and tie that into the Holy Souls? Was that a stretch and you were trying to figure out how to connect those things, or was it a natural connection?
It was a natural connection, Doug. You know that God has impressed on all his great saints. There's not one saint that he hasn't impressed on them to pray for the souls in purgatory. Padre Pio, St. Gertrude the Great, Catherine of Genoa, Nicholas of Tolentino, and Faustina. All of them had this tender devotion for the souls in purgatory. Either they had apparitions, revelations, writings. So she was a perfect match. She wrote about the souls. She had insights about the souls. And, being the purgatory lady, I was clearly attracted to it. I had thought about doing something on Faustina back as far back as 2006, Doug. It was always in my mind because of the writings in the diary. But other books were coming along, and the time, this is just total providence. This was not planned for the Jubilee year.
No, okay.
It was something, it was been on my mind. And so when we were putting this together, the proposal, Pope Francis, declared it the Jubilee year, and we were just stunned. So we attributed to God's providence as well. But it was her devotion to the souls that attracted me.
And who's we? When you talk about the we came up with this? Or
our Sunday visitor.
Okay.
Yeah, my editor is Bert Gezzi.
Okay,
is,
sure.
is my chief editor.
Okay.
It's a great team. So it was on my mind, and the timing was perfect. The other thing I discovered, Doug, is that St. Faustina is the most Googled saint on the internet.
Really?
I learned,
okay.
Yes. I also learned that Catholic marketing statistics said that St. Faustina is the most in demand with regard to books, statues, medals, in the last 2 years, 2014 and 2015. So here we have her being number one on Google, leading Amazon, and there's no books about her insight and revelations on purgatory. So now we have something most comprehensive that we're able to, invite people to join her to pray this important devotion that was very dear to her as well.
Right, and it's interesting. So did you discover that because of your own personal reading of the diary, or were there other sources you relied on? How did it really come to your attention that there was that real strong connection?
It was the personal reading of the diary. I had picked up that diary back in the 80s. Now, purgatory didn't come into the forefront with me until the 90s, the early 90s, but I had read the diary, but I read the diary off and on all the time. So when I was involved with purgatory, those revelations and visits and discussions that she had with purgatory were in the diary, so that jumped out at me.
Which is great because you feature those in this book, and it's the kind of thing, I think, in terms of reading the diary, that the diary is so large, there's so much in it, that in some cases you just breeze past this, and now to read these specifically in dealing with holy souls, sisters who had died coming back. You have some wonderful passage she talks about where she was disappointed it didn't seem her prayers and even the congregation's prayers were helping the sister, but she persisted anyway, and then later on that sister came back and said that her time in purgatory was almost up thanks to their prayers.
Thanks to their prayers and her love of neighbor. Her love of neighbor.
Why love of neighbor?
Because
what does that mean?
That's what we're all called to do. In fact, that's the one of the two essences of divine mercy is to trust in Jesus and to be merciful to your neighbor. And Jesus said this to her unquestionably. If you want to know if you love God, unquestionably it's showing mercy either by word, by deed, or by prayer. That's when you can say you love God. And so, of course, that's love of neighbor, love God and love your neighbor.
Right, and that
yourself.
came out also because I think, as you explained in the book, the idea that even though Faustina felt as if it wasn't helping, she continued anyway.
She persisted.
Because of that kind of love of neighbor.
Exactly.
Even if I can't see the fruits of it right away, it doesn't matter that doing it is the right thing for me to do.
You'd be a great
right?
co-author, Doug.
Right, okay.
Absolutely, absolutely. You nailed it. Very interesting. You bring up the revelations and the insights, because right in the beginning of the book, I pulled together all of those insights, the conversation she had with the souls and what they said to her, and it came out into, we called it Purgatory in the Eyes of St. Faustina. And it came out to 12, we called them meditations, but there were 12 of her revelations. And it was very interesting, Doug, what they said to her and what they requested. First of all, they told her, she asked them if they were happy, and they said they were happy because they were doing God's will. Do God's will. And that's what gave them joy in purgatory. So even though they're suffering, they are happy because they're saved and because they're in union with God's will. And they said to her, do God's will. It's Mother Angelica's mantra, do God's will in the present moment. Right. In fact, Mother Angelica taught me this, again, when I was, in the School of Purgatory, that to avoid purgatory, what's the main way to avoid purgatory is doing the will of God.
It struck me in reading those passages and thinking in terms of the holy souls, in the sense, because sometimes people hear, they say, well, they're suffering, but they're happy. That sounds kind of contradictory. But the idea of, in some cases, and again, them in a sense asking us to say, do God's will while you can. Because when you get to purgatory, or if you're in purgatory, that's where you realize, I could have done more.
Yes.
I should have done more. And I remember Mother Angelica, one of her quotes, she said, one of the things that she most was concerned about was that when she died, she went there and heard, you could have trusted more, you could have done more. And I think that maybe that's where that whole Jesus, I trust in you ties in too.
Exactly. So that's a main theme throughout the whole diary is her prayers, her meditations, is always God's will. The other thing that she asked them is, what their greatest suffering was, and in unison they said longing for God. So purgatory is standing before God, seeing Him in all His glory, seeing the lovableness and the depth of love that He has for you, and also seeing what you're talking about, the grace and the strength that He gave you to fulfill your mission, and where you fell short is really kind of what gets you into purgatory. So it was doing the will of God, longing for God because they saw Him, and now they're unable to be with Him, which is, the saints say, is the worst suffering, physical, any kind of physical or mental suffering on earth. That's the worst, because you saw Him and you're unable to be with Him. So that's their greatest longing. And the other was what you had mentioned before. You picked up on this, Doug. I noticed the pattern with the 12 meditations. The most souls that visited her were the sisters of her own order, those deceased sisters, and they asked her for specific things. They asked her for the Mass, which of course is the highest act of worship, the highest form of prayer, and that's the most powerful way to help the souls in purgatory is the Mass. Then they asked her for fasting.
Would that be going to a Mass, having a Mass said for them?
Yes. For her, it would be definitely offering her Mass. Offering her Mass. For us, we could offer our Mass, offer our indulgence, but we have the financial opportunity to have a Mass offered as well, with a stipend.
And there's another kind of Mass too that's already
Gregorian Masses, of course. Doug, I'll be saying Gregorian Masses until I die. There are 30 Masses in a row for one deceased soul. Pope St. Gregory popularized this devotion. He had 30 Masses offered for a monk in his monastery called Justin. Why 30? Why not 50 or 60? He was bringing back the tradition of the Old Testament. They mourned Moses and Jacob. Aaron were mourned for 30 days.
Oh, okay.
So that's where this tradition,
where that comes from.
That's where it comes from. And we recommend this at EWTN, very supportive of the Pious Union of St. Joseph that have these Gregorian Masses available. I think it's pusj.org. They do a wonderful job. So yes, offer your Mass, have Masses offered, or Gregorian Masses, put them in your will. Cardinal George had those Masses in his will. And then the third thing that these the nuns were asking of her was the eternal rest prayer. and I was trying to figure out what that was, why that particular prayer. Well, it's a prayer of the church for the dead. It's what they say at wakes. The priest prays at wakes, also at the graveside, and it's an indulgence prayer where it helps remit temporal punishment. You know, an indulgence is when you receive an indulgence, you go to confession, the stain is removed. I mean, the guilt is removed, but the stain is still there. How do you remove the stain? In the word indulgence comes from the Latin indulgentia, which means tender. God is indulging. It's the fruits of our Lord's suffering, of His crucifixion, of His death. It's the merits that we're gaining, and these indulgences help to remit that. And it's a Jubilee year. We have special indulgence. Divine Mercy Sunday, we gain a special indulgence. So I'd say get greedy for indulgences because they've been given a bad rap. St. Joseph Cafassa was called a glutton for indulgences. It's not a bad thing. It's a very positive part of our faith, and we need, as Pope Francis talked about, take advantage of the indulgences.
And I think if people go to EWTN.com, there's some information on our faith page that would explain the whole indulgences
and the requirements.
How it works for this year,
you do a very good job of that. Yes,
I try to keep.
In all my books, I try to have the prayers that are indulgence that can help with the souls.
Well, right at the beginning, you got Most Reverend Thomas J. Paprocki, Bishop of Springfield in Illinois, who wrote a book on ice hockey. In fact,
that's right. Yeah, he's a great runner too.
But, he pointed out Pope Francis invited the church to reflect on the corporal and spiritual works of mercy, see them as the standard by which we live as disciples of the Lord. That seems to be important in here as well, right?
Yes, it was interesting. Again, we weren't tying it in with Pope Francis's Jubilee year. It was just a great, he's talking about that. And then the reason I brought those in, Doug, I found out that Sister Faustina's order, that's part of their apostolate, is to work with to strive to perform the corporal and spiritual works of mercy. And so we put those in there, and what we did differently with those works, Doug, we turned it into an examination of conscience in light of divine mercy. So now you've got a new a form of examination of conscience that you could say at night to help you stay in your lane and perform these great works. There's two of them that of course that are important to me that I think sometimes gets overlooked. Burying the dead. In fact, there's a person in Chicago that saves money up and has been doing this for years and brings it to the cemetery and donates it for those that can't afford.
For indigent people, kind of like the Potter's Field kind of thing used to be, right? Okay.
And then, of course, the spiritual work of mercy, we have praying for the living and the deceased. So that's something, again, not to leave off, our deceased loved ones. They need a share of our indulgences. Christmas is the time when most souls are released from purgatory. Easter is the next greatest season. During Lent, it's perfect time to invite, the souls in as part of your sacrifice. Give them a share of your mercy. Give them a share of your sacrifices, even of your joys, so they too can rise at Easter with our Lord.
Right, it's interesting because you alluded earlier about Cardinal George having the Gregorian Masses in his, and people need to realize that as much as all of us might think that Cardinal George, well, he was a great man, he must have went directly to heaven. Yeah. No one really knows, and sometimes we sanctify everybody on the way out the door, and we shouldn't take for granted that anybody is particularly there because, as you point out here in the book, I thought as well, is that many of those in purgatory are those clerical or other people because they were given more graces in a sense to do more things, and so they were held to a higher standard, right?
Absolutely, you nailed it, Doug. In fact, Faustina calls them the chosen souls, and that how we leave off too soon praying for them because we tend to canonize them. And she said in the diary, and again, everything we're talking about is in the new book. She said that that they really need our prayers because they were given extraordinary graces and are going to be held accountable, more accountable than you or I. So it's important to have a mass offered for the priest that baptized your children or you or the bishop that confirmed you or your children or the priest that hear your confessions, give you communion, offer mass. So we really need to pray for them, and she talks about that in her diary, and of course we bring that in here because I consider the priests and the clergy some of the most abandoned souls because of that very reason.
Exactly. Now what is, you have in here, it's a litany of mercy for the holy souls in purgatory. Now is this out of the diary, or where did this come from?
This was something, we have litanies in all quite a few different litanies in our other books, Praying with the Saints and Prayers, Promises, and Devotions, and we wanted to do something more contemporary and in line with Faustina.
Okay.
So it's something new and different.
Okay. So this was something that, who actually wrote this thing?
Me and my editors put it
that together.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Now, you've got here, and as you talked about Purgatory in the Eyes of St. Faustina, 12 daily meditations. You were talking about that a little bit earlier.
Right, yeah.
Recall loved ones who have died, and in a spirit of true charity, keep in mind other departed souls who have no one on earth to pray for them. Reflect on the reality of purgatory, and those so close to heaven must still prepare to enter it and pray for them. And again, that was one of the things you also talk about, and we've talked about before, is the idea that part of it is that a lot of people don't believe in purgatory anymore. We don't hear, and you talk about in the kind of frequently asked questions in the back,
Right.
why don't we hear about it that much anymore? Why isn't it we hear about it preached?
Yeah, it wasn't. We actually answer that
in the back
Yeah,
of
we
the
have
book.
some of those
Right,
questions.
right.
It was, there was a time back in the 70s where it was not fashionable to teach in the seminaries. So what happens when you don't teach it in the seminaries? You're going to get priests that are not, preaching the doctrine, and then that ends up with, the faithful not hearing, the facts and the truth about faith, about sin, about grace, and about purgatory. But that's coming around in a big way. We've got it's become part of, very strong part of the seminary curriculum, if you will, and priests, John Paul II priests, homeschoolers, people want to know more about purgatory. In fact, our Sunday Visitor did a study, and that was the most often asked question. They wanted more information about purgatory.
Right, exactly, because it can be sometimes confusing. People say, and we talk, is it a place or is it a state? And I know you use a quote from John Paul II in here about a state of existence. So people are kind of trying to figure out. And also, in some sense, the idea is purgatory the room right outside of hell, or is it the room right outside of heaven?
You're saved if you're in purgatory.
Right, so it's the room right outside of heaven,
you're
right?
saved, Doug. It's
the waiting room for heaven. It's not the
it's a little emergency room.
Right,
and, and here, that's a good point, because people think, and nowhere in the books will you find this, people think it's a punishment. Purgatory is not a punishment. It's God's love, and it's His mercy. And punishment can only be used in a sense, Doug, that it's going to be spiritually and psychologically demanding, as any virtue is. God is not trying to lower the boom. He's not trying to pull the rug out from under you. He's not trying to say you failed me completely. He's trying to prepare His unprepared children to be able to stand before Him face to face for all eternity. And what is it? Well, Jesus gave Faustina light in terms of what his attributes are. And there's three great attributes of God, Doug. The first is His holiness. And Faustina said He's so holy that the virtues and the principalities, which are the choirs of angels, tremble before Him, and the pure spirits are veiled and cry out, holy, holy, holy. Well, who can say that they're pure enough to stand before our pure and holy God?
Right, exactly.
Okay? Yes, you can avoid purgatory, doing the will of God. That's the great saints in all things. So, yes, you can go straight to heaven. But who can say that you're totally pure? We don't know that. And the next greatest attribute you talked about was His justice. That His justice, she said, cuts right to the heart, and nothing can withstand Him. And the third and the greatest attribute of all, he said, is His love and His mercy. And that's the attribute she wanted to emulate. She wanted to take into her heart and imitate. And it was interesting, it wasn't infused in her. God invited her into the school of mercy, where He invites us. And so how did she become merciful, Doug? I thought it would be scientific and something that I couldn't get my arms around. No, it was the sacraments, it was the devotional life, it was the rosary, it was showing mercy and love of neighbor. And in fact, she said that it was the sacrament of reconciliation and communion that deepened her mercy. So those acts literally open your heart wide to become more merciful.
Now, you alluded earlier, you talked about with St. Faustina, with the Holy Souls answering one voice, their greatest torment was longing for God. In that same section, she also says, I saw Our Lady visiting the souls in purgatory. The souls call her the star of the sea. She brings them refreshment.
Yes. Doug, that was very interesting. I researched why did they call her Star of the Sea? And right toward the end of the book, I finally was able to get some information. But this is it's one of her titles, Star of the Sea.
Right.
Also, the North Star Polaris is a fixed star that navigators have used since antiquity. And she is the guide, they call her the steering star. She spiritually steers our way to her sun. So that's why she's called Star of the Sea. Refreshment is her presence and her consolation when she visits the souls in purgatory. She brings the light of God to them, and her presence actually relieves them from the longing.
You have in the reflection here in the book here, it says just after that section, the angels are active in purgatory,
yes.
consoling the holy souls and inspiring friends and relatives to offer a mass and practice good deeds for their dearly departed, those corporal works of mercy, etc. The angels tell us those in purgatory who on earth is praying for them. I thought that was interesting.
Yes. You know, the angels provide more than transportation to purgatory, Doug. They console the souls in purgatory. They inspire loved ones and friends to pray for them. You know, when you hear a name or something comes up in your heart, you know, in the past, a person in the past that have died, that's your guardian angel telling you to pray for them. So they console the holy souls.
Maybe somebody you haven't thought about in a long time.
Exactly.
Right, yeah.
That's them, you know, saying an eternal rest prayer for them, offer mass, and then so they console, they inspire, and they do inform the souls of who's praying for them. And then in turn, those souls pray for that person. They're particularly concerned about their loved ones. So they're praying for their loved ones for their salvation, and they're praying to the Holy Spirit to give their loved ones the grace to avoid purgatory and to understand the malice of sin and to become holy.
Well, you say here, moved by contrition, the souls in purgatory would rather not go to heaven than stand before God without their wedding garments. And that's really what you were talking about. I mean, really, you think about it in the Old Testament, not looking into the face of God.
Right.
That idea, even in Revelation, where John is, you know, knocked down, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, so you say to yourself, well, if that's what happens to someone as holy as him, how would you stand up?
Yes,
right?
yeah. You know, you just do the will of God. Try to do the will of God in all things. Frequent the sacraments. Pray the rosary. All the devotional, of course. And then, you know, love of God and neighbor is the great thing. To be merciful, because that mercy is going to get you to heaven.
Well, one of the things you say here too is when talking about mercy, one of the things here says, bear wrongs patiently. That's always a tough one.
That's a tough one, exactly. It's not easy. They're easy to say and they're easy to understand, but to implement on a daily basis, you know that.
Right, especially when you're dealing with something where you're, in effect, you're justified. It's not that you're wrong, you were wronged.
Right.
And to some degree, you have the right to be offended by that, but you need to let it go.
Yes, you know, Father Mitch brought this up on one of the shows, is that when you pray for that person, that dilutes the impact of the pain.
It's hard to be that angry at them if you're praying for them, right?
Exactly. I mean, it does. I mean, there are things you need, you know, correct. You know, use your common sense. But the prayer does help you redirect your thoughts and your will.
Right. You also say here, under forgive all injuries, do I hate to give up long-held grudges because in some way they give me comfort?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's like comfortably miserable.
That's right. Yeah. Well, it allows me to feel bad for myself and gives me something to complain about.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's also a good reason for me to have an excuse of why something isn't working out in my life in some other way.
And
right.
In fact, it's interesting. It's something. It deforms you, really, Doug. You know, if you let go and let God. He'll transform that, and he makes good out of those injustices. You know, I try to remember that. You do the best you can, then let go, because, you know, there's poetic justice, and he'll take care of that. And I've seen it in my life. I've seen it happen many times, especially working when I was in the corporate world. You see a lot happening in the secular world, and you do a lot of praying, and you do the best you can, and then maybe it might happen, you know, currently, but down the road, you know, you'll see God's hand in it. Right,
and many times you'll see situations, as we know, where we see people who might be perceived as doing the wrong thing, such as seemingly being happy and successful and stuff. Many times, like you said, as the church knows, over a long period of time is how you judge things, you know, and see where that person ends up 15, 20, 30 years later as to whether, and no one knows what's really going on inside.
Right, exactly. You have to pray for them, because you can't, that Jesus talks about that, don't judge.
Right,
do not
just
judge.
by what the outside
just pray.
So let me ask you one question before we go, because we're out of time. Is another book in the works?
We have an empty purgatory yet, Doug.
Okay, so there's got to be another one.
Yeah, we're looking at some other things and some new discoveries. We have a new
Okay.
discovery in Purgatory. We found it's gluten-free, Doug.
Oh, it's gluten-free. Okay, that's very interesting. So at least this week. Thank you so
Good to
much,
see you
Susan
again. Thanks for
Tassone,
having me.
our dietary approach to making it through Purgatory. We're speaking here with Susan Tassone. Her book, St. Faustina Prayer Book for the Holy Souls in Purgatory, published by OSV, available at the EWTN Religious Catalog, EWTNRC.com. These books are always popular. Check it out. Check us out next time right here